Okay. Hey, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's discussion, Customer Journey Mapping, creating your ideal customer journey map without overcomplicating it. We're going to have a nice, easygoing discussion today with some of the brightest minds in customer success. We've got Irit Isaacs from CSM Practice with us, and our own Brian Nichols from User IQ as well. With customer experience now ranking actually higher to most consumers versus pricing and features, it's really important that your CS team understands the customer journey, and they're packing a powerful punch as they walk their customers through the process. So we're going to have a great discussion today, and we're going to talk about a bunch of cool stuff, starting with why you actually need a customer journey map in the first place. We're going to talk about that, how you can maximize your results through each stage of the process, what metrics you should be thinking about tracking as you're looking at how you're doing in the customer journey, and then common pitfalls to avoid so that you don't ruin that experience for your customers. Before we jump in, we're going to do a couple quick housekeeping topics. The discussion is going to be recorded today, and we're going to share that recording out on social media later on. It'll be on our YouTube channel as well for anybody that may not be able to attend the whole thing. We're going to be doing a couple audience polls throughout the conversation to get a sense of how you guys are doing it, and we're going to talk about the results of those polls. And then lastly, if you have any questions for the panelists, there's a question box. If you can type in those questions, I will be monitoring those. And so we're going to try to include those as the discussion goes on or at the end of the conversation today. Lastly, just food for thought, our panelists love really tough questions that they have not prepared for. So if you think of any, certainly don't be shy. I will try to include them as we go along. All right, a couple quick introductions, and then we will jump right into it. I'm Dan Bonet. I'm Chief Revenue Officer here at User IQ. At User IQ, our mission is to give customer success teams the power to predict outcomes and impact company growth with the most intuitive, action-oriented platform in the market. I'm going to be facilitating the discussion today, and now I want to introduce our panelists. Next, we have Irit, I want to pronounce it right, Isaacs? Yeah. Irit, if you would take a moment, she's Chief Customer Officer and CEO of CSM Practice. If you would take a moment, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about what you guys do at CSM Practice. That would be great.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Irit Isaacs, and as Dan said, I am the Chief Customer Officer and CEO for one of the first customer success strategy consulting firms in the world, CSM Practice. I work with companies to help them increase retention and improve and optimize upsell revenues, and of course, the overall customer experience through customer journey maps and other methodologies that I and my team has developed through the 8 years that we have been in business. Really excited to share with all of you some of those key learnings, experience, and expertise that I have accumulated over the years working with over 100 companies. And please connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn's below, and really looking forward to this session.
Awesome, really nice to have you here. I did notice also that you may be wearing the same shirt that is in your picture. It's almost like we did the photography session right before this event started.
Totally random.
Looks great. Totally random, exactly. Thanks for being with us today, Irit. Next up, we have Brian Nichols. Brian is Vice President of Customer Success at User IQ. Brian, if you don't mind taking a few minutes, introducing yourself and talking about what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. So good to be here with everybody. Irit and Dan, it's an honor to be alongside of you on this panel. My name is Brian. I'm the VP of Customer Success here at User IQ. My job responsibilities are really everything after the customer signs up with us, making sure that they have a world-class experience from an onboarding, adoption, everything we're going to talk about today type journey. Prior to coming to User IQ, I was with a consulting organization for 7 years called PRP out of California, where worked with the customers for 7 years. I've been in some sort of customer role my my entire career. So really love working with the customers, and happy to be here today.
Awesome. Nice to have you with us here too, Brian. Thanks for joining.
Yeah,
Okay. First thing oh wait, we need to go back and see. He's got the shirt from his photo he is wearing today. So these are the original people. The original panelists are with us, in fact.
Here we are.
All right. We're going to kick this off with a poll because we want to understand where everybody's state of maturity is when it comes to building and deploying a customer journey experience. So we're going to take 30 to 45 seconds and ask this question. Do you have a well-defined and documented and tech-supported customer journey map? And we'll give you some options to select as to where you guys fit in the state of maturity of rolling that out. So appreciate if everybody could participate, and then we will talk about the results.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see where everyone is. I can say that, when I work with different customers, and so do you, Brian, right? We see different teams and different maturity levels around customer journey mapping. Super excited to see the results.
Yeah, I have my own kind of assumption as to what this is what the results are gonna say, but I'm often surprised too. So that's I'll take that with me.
Me too.
Okay, we'll keep it rolling for another 10, 15 seconds or so.
Yeah, 100%. The good news is that after the webinar, if we ran this same poll, like in 1 or 2 months, hopefully there's going to be a change for the same audience. We'll see more. Yeah. Yeah, see that.
Okay, so there's the result. It looks like almost 70% have started it, but have not fully defined it, which is great because I hope this session will be really helpful for everybody that's in that state. And 21% don't have one defined at all. So, and 10% or so have them defined and really well rolled out. So good. For about 90% of the attendees, this should be really useful for y'all. So that's really great. So let's start with just some basics for a second. Why do you even need a customer journey map, right? Why is it important? That's certainly, let's just lay that foundation here for a second. So Brian, if you don't mind leading us off with that question, and then we'll let the conversation unfold from there.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. You'll hear me work a lot as we walk through today, talking about 2s and 3s, and so there's many various reasons why you want to build a customer journey. I'll share 3 with the group that I think to me are the highest or the most important. Number 1, it allows your organization to identify both positive and not so positive moments for your customers and act upon those. And obviously the positive you want to do a little bit more of, perhaps tweak, make it a little bit better, depending on what your customer base looks like. And the not so positive or the negative, you really want to look at that and figure out, both from a data-driven objective standpoint and a subjective standpoint, why that's not going exactly right for your customers. Number 2, the number 2 reason I have is it allows you really to work on segmenting your customers into what makes a successful part of your journey map successful for any type of customer. And then number 3, from a process change standpoint, once you have these built, and I saw, like you said, Dan, about 10% have theirs either well-defined and are tech supported. Those are big overhauls to make if you try to go in and redo the entire thing all at once. So having a well-defined customer journey allows you to make small process changes or small tweaks here and there to better your journey versus trying to change it all at once.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. I do have one follow-up question, then we're going to turn it over to Irit. When is the right time to actually create this customer journey map, right? I mean, think about like from startup to first set of customers to, enterprise. When do you need to have this really well defined?
I think you need to have, when you're starting, you need to have something outlined. I would not recommend having a full journey map before you have a few interactions with your customers, only because your customers are really going to drive what makes your journey map valuable. You'll make it, but they kind of define it. So I recommend when early on, outlining it, seeing what was best off of prior experiences, but then really looking to make it more mature as you interact with your customers and you find out what works for your particular customer.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Brian. Yuri, would love to hear what you have to say about this. Why do they need it? If Brian missed anything, hopefully there was a couple things you can add to that, but also, how can you start this process off?
Yeah, I'd say, another interesting question here is to answer this one is to ask, what are some of the problems we're seeing when there's a lack of customer success journey defined? And here's what we're seeing. First of all, the team is not proactive. There's no customer journey, so we're mainly are occupied in addressing customers' asks or resolving support tickets, because we need to fill out our time somehow, and there's no direction from management, so we're going to be super reactive. If the company has multiple products or multiple regions or went through an acquisition, usually there's not going to be the same language. Even if it's a small startup and you have 5 people in your CSM or 3 people in your CSM team and there's no customer journey, one of you might call it implementation and the other one might call it onboarding. There's no consistency, and therefore issue number 3, the customer experience is completely random at the mercy of the customer success manager's skills and expertise and what they think should be the experience or the journey that they will be leading the customer. So there's a lot of variability that I can tell you that customers don't connect with that very well. Finally, I want to say this. If you don't have a customer success journey, any kind of upsells or renewals are at the grace of whatever is happening at random, okay? If you do have a customer journey and you do it appropriately, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes as we progress through the webinar, not only can you make sure that your retention and renewal rates are higher, but you're also going to seed opportunities for upsell in a much more sophisticated and intentional way that is proactive and well designed in advance. So these are the type of problems that customer journey maps tend to solve. And that's why you need to invest in that.
Awesome. That's really insightful. Thank you. Thank you for kicking us off, both of you. When you think about, okay, so now I know I need to do one, like I'm going to go ahead and get started. Do you have any recommendations for like some simple tools or techniques that people can use to kind of get this thing laid out on paper? You can start visualizing it and then start putting the actual processes in place. What would you maybe kick us off on what you might recommend people get started with?
Yeah, I love huddling my customers in one room or one Zoom room, however the case might be, and really get all the people that might have an impact on the customer journey or have an understanding of, what are the use cases or what are the inherent risks that we're seeing for both renewals and upsell, and then really think through what should the journey look like? What are the different phases that are important for our business model? And I'll give you some examples. So for example, in year 1, we might have some inherent risks that completely dissipate in year 2 because we don't have the onboarding, or there's things that we need to double click on in year 1, or opportunities that we can't really shore up very quickly with customers because we haven't built a trusted relationship with them. So I like to think about the phases as things that customers need or are even ready for throughout their life cycle. And then think through what are the inherent opportunities and risks, and then what are the types of activities, if there are any risks, are there any activities that we can weave into the process and the journey proactively to mitigate those risks? And if there are opportunities, for example, the first renewal that we're expecting at the end of year 1, what are the things that we absolutely need to do in Q1, Q2, Q3, be leading to that renewal conversation so that it's a no-brainer for the customer when the renewal decision comes. And that's really the process. How we do it with, Word documents or Google Docs and Google Sheets. I think that's the best way to start.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. I did have a question come in, so I want to make sure that I can ask this one because it sounds like it's probably a quick one. This is from David. David, thanks for the question. Should you share the customer journey map with your customers, or is this more of an internal document? Eureka, I'll leave that one. Well, I'll just get both of your perspectives on it real quick, and then we'll go to the next topic.
Happy to take it. So yeah, listen, there's actually multiple types of journey maps for customer success teams. Forget the one that we do for marketing, right? Initially, we definitely want to create a lifecycle journey map that's for us, but then take the activities that are not super internal. Like you might have an activity called sales handoff. You don't want to show that to the customer. Who cares, right? But there are some activities that you definitely want to communicate to the customer. Listen, this is what we recommend. This is why it's important for you. And by the way, these are the people we need from your side, and to participate. And so how do you create an alignment and expectation is by creating this visual for them to say, this is what you can expect this year. These are the people. This is the scheduled activities we're going to have with you. And it's great to align expectation. Would I include all the activities in that journey map that I'm going to show to customers? No. Will I definitely recommend to my clients to create one? 100%. Yes.
Got it.
Awesome. Yeah, I would second what Arit said. I mean, I think if it's similar, if you think about it from your product teams, right? They have their internal product roadmap, and then most organizations have an external. I think similar here, particularly if you're looking for feedback from your customer on any one point within the journey map, share it with them, what you're comfortable sharing with them, and get their opinion on it.
All right, perfect. Thank you both for all of that. That was great. What I want to do now is let's take this is a very basic example of a customer journey, right? But let's take through it. Let's walk through it and talk about specifically for, 90% of the folks that don't have this well defined and are still working on theirs. Let's talk about this basic model. Dig deep, maybe not dig deep, but dig into each of the steps and talk about a couple of things that you should be thinking about as you go through this journey and put it together. And then we'll go even a level deeper on the next topic. But let's kick off with this. Eureka, if you want to get started with us, that'd be great. Maybe talk first about generally how you map this out, what you think about the stages in the journey, and then jump into onboarding, and we'll kick it off.
Yeah, look, great examples here of different phases you might have in your customer journey map. You don't have to have all these phases. In fact, these are great frameworks and pillars of areas of activities that I would actually really encourage everyone to think through. When we work with our clients, there are actually 8 of them. So this is a good example of the 5 out of 8 areas that I actually recommend thinking about when doing the journey maps. And what I love most about this slide is that it starts with what is the goal for each phase. And we actually have a template that we use with our clients to say, all right, what are the phases? We might rename the phases because we know that when we have a name, we're going to use it with our clients accidentally. So we think carefully about how do we want to brand the name of the phase so that the customer understands what the focus is for them. Define what is the objective, what does success looks like at the end of that phase so that even CSMs would know when does this phase end. One thing that I notice a lot of times is that we don't have clear accountability for each phase. So if it's a bigger company, a lot of times you might have different people, different specialized roles owning specific phases in the customer journey. So make sure you're very, very clear about that. And then, of course, then now that you have the objectives, you have the key metrics for each phase, you have the owner. Now it's time to outline the different activities you wish to include. And then maybe before you design the activities, you can start with, okay, what activities do I have now? And then what are the opportunities and risks I have with these existing activities that I already have? So what are the additional activities that I need to add to this phase to mitigate opportunity? Sorry, my dog is sick. To mitigate, that was not me coughing.
Sure, it was your dog. We get it. We understand.
I can't control it. To mitigate risks as well as promote upsell opportunities early on in the process. Yeah.
Awesome. I want to give Brian a second to comment on just like the overall framework for how he thinks through laying out this journey, and then we'll go into each of the stages. We are, as I anticipated on this slide, getting a handful of questions coming, so we'll try to address those as well. But Brian, if you want to take a look at this from a high level and tell us how you think about these, that would be great.
Yeah, great comments from Marie. You know, for me, two additional items to add on here. Number one, when you take a look at this roadmap, and it's a template, right? That's exactly what it is. Each one of your roadmaps is going to be different depending on exactly who your customer base is, right? Even in the same industry, you might have a different ideal customer profile. And so you really need to, find something, a template that you like, but then make it your own. Don't make it somebody else's, make it your own based on what you feel is most successful for your organization. The second thing I'll recommend to everybody is, as you go through not only the individual stages, but the overall journey itself, we always try to use our cue to start with the end in mind. And what I mean by that is, what is it I want at the end of the path overall from my customer? Well, most people would say I want them to either expand or retain, right? Just depending on where your company is. And then break that down into each section. You know, what do I want at the end for my customer from an onboarding standpoint? What is that singular statement I can make about how successful my onboarding is, or how successful my adoption is, right? So if you sort of have that North Star, if you will, I'll call it, that allows you to really build out sort of the process, the steps as you go through your map. So again, think about starting with that singular end goal, both overall and with each area, and then work backwards from there.
Yeah, I really like that. There were some really good comments. If I had the ability to take notes on this, I probably would. I heard some really cool things. One, like, start with the end in mind. That's always important. What do you want to get out of it? What do you want your customer to get out of this journey, right? Understanding, as Irit mentioned, when does the journey actually stop at each phase, and who owns each step in this? I think that can sometimes be overlooked, and that can be really detrimental. So thanks for those points. That was really good. I have a question that came in I want to ask y'all to respond to real quick. This is from Fawn, and it's, do you recommend having journey maps for multi-year relationships? For example, your year one might be onboarding, and then maybe in year two it starts at adoption or something like that. What would you guys recommend when you sign a multi-year deal?
100%, yes. So there's different ways to skin this cat, and I think sometimes what we're seeing is that the year one might have different phases than year two, and then what happens in the real world, is it Quan? Is that customers might move from, they might then opt into additional modules or additional products as your company grows and purchases or goes through M&As. And then they might cycle back to that year one mode because now you need to onboard them to another solution, or maybe the customer changed and they acquired another company. Now they want you to implement and onboard this other region that they now have. So think about it, the customer journey, we really linearly usually draw it, but the reality is that customers go through it in a cyclical way very, very often. So the reason I said year one and year two is because it's easier to think about it like that. But a customer might have go through these phases again and again over time.
Yeah, you could sign somebody onto a new product, and then you got to start with the onboarding again. You could lose a power user and get a new person that you have to train, and you're starting from onboarding again. You're making it sound like this is like a very challenging role to be in. It never ends, and it always starts over. That's not fun.
Well, customers might go, after a year or two, they might go back to an implementation phase with you, partially or fully, for a number of reasons. So it's just important to say, when we're just implementing a new module or a new product for them, or even a new team, are they in a more fragile state? So I would actually develop one customer journey map for these phases in mind, and think, what are the inherent risks in that early stage or in a re-implementation process versus later on, when we actually get them to a value statement and they're much more open for upsell and cross-sell. So that's kind of like what the gist of it. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Reed. I want to keep going, Brian. I'm gonna let you lead off with the next question here, which is, okay, now let's break these down into each of their individual buckets and just talk a little bit about how we should be thinking about each of these stages. So Brian, if you can lead us off talking a little bit about onboarding. How do you think about the onboarding stage in this process? What are some of the markers that a customer has moved past this stage? And maybe a couple of data points of, hey, what people should be thinking about capturing during that step in the journey. That was a 4-part question, so I made it a little extra complicated for you.
Yeah, and we only have an hour. That's all I have to talk. Oh, no, I'm just kidding.
I can stay longer.
So you know, onboarding to me, we'll see this a little bit later in the talk when we talk about the most important stages, and not to lead the witnesses, but onboarding to me is probably the most crucial part of your customer journey part. You think about every first interaction that you've had either with an individual or a company, a product, a software solution. It's always important to get off on that right foot. With that said, what I would highly encourage you all to think about from an onboarding process is one word, and that's simplification. Simplify your onboarding process. Are you going to be able to show your customers everything, all the product functionality of your app in the first 60 days? Probably not. So have a really good understanding of the value that they're looking for. Make sure you have a really good meeting with your sales team, your AE, to understand what was said in the sales conversation, and design your journey map around doing that. That was the first question, Dan. What were remind me what the second, third, and fourth questions were?
A marker that they have exited the onboarding stage and are now in the next stage. Like, what do you look for? And a couple data points that you might recommend people are tracking during this stage.
Yeah, so to understand if they're out of the onboarding stage, I think it's when when your customers are getting results, or some people might call it they're getting value out of your product. No more are we sort of in the honeymoon stage. We are actually being able to use your solution to drive our business to be better, right? And that can come from a couple of ways. You can ask the customer directly via a call or a voice of customer survey. You can track it yourself, right, and provide reporting. Some organizations, UserIQ is working on this right now. We're working on an ROI tracker, right? So we can actually go to the customer and say, hey, this is what you ask us to do. This is what we see from our side is happening to you. Here's data-driven, here's data to support that. And so, are they doing, are able to do essentially what you told them to do? From a KPI standpoint, that's a good question. What we look at UserIQ, so we use surveys as a heavy indicator, right? Are you getting value from our solution? Yes or no? A yes means that at that point they're probably either close to or at the end of the onboarding phase. A no or no response means that they're probably still in the onboarding phase, right? Because they're not driving value. I think that when the customer starts talking to you about data and being able to report back to their organization, I think that's a key marker that they've sort of moved past the onboarding stage because they've got the product set up. They're seeing the value, and now they want to know how to report that value back to their colleagues, their bosses, their board, stuff of that nature. So I think those are the key KPIs. One last thing to mention on this is the value KPI has to come from the customer. I had a boss once tell me, what we say is hearsay, what they say is gold. So if you think that the value is coming in 30 days, but your customers are saying it's 90 days, it's 90 days. It's not 30 days. Listen to what your customer is saying in that.
Got it. That's really good. Thanks, Brian. Reed, I want to give you the chance to add to this. We had like 4 or 5 questions come in, so I do want to get to some of those as well. But Reed, how do you think about onboarding? Love to hear your perspective.
First of all, Brian, I really love how you capture the value via survey and then use that as a milestone to say, when is the onboarding complete? because I still find myself in conversations with new clients where I ask them, when is your onboarding complete? Well, after 90 days. I was like,
Yeah.
that's not.
What if they haven't logged in 90 days?
Yeah, like, so apparently sometimes they do that because if it's a more complex system, they want to communicate to customers that, hey, you have 90 days to complete this. After that, you need to purchase service. I get that, but honestly, if that's the external conversation, that's fine, but you can't really define the onboarding phase completion but by anything but delivering value or an initial value to customers. And so I want to celebrate what Brian said, that even if you are very much into a tech touch or very low touch type of companies, they even struggle more because with a high touch, you can actually ask the customer because you have an assigned CSM or an assigned professional services person. And the idea that Brian brought up around surveys, are you getting value or not, is a great way, or having them ask about reports is a great way to just do this in a more agile manner. So I really love that. That's something that I learned from this webinar. So thank you, Brian. Besides that, I think that a lot of companies need to think through that first value delivered concept. What should it even be? What would you like to recommend to customers that they should opt into as first value? Because sometimes, and that's a big risk to the onboarding experience, they either think that they can implement everything during the onboarding phase, which is like the big bang approach, get me everything, until then I don't want anything. Or they're trying to say, too many records, too many accounts to be brought into, whatever records they have, too much database to be infused. And actually, it's good to start small. There's certain use cases that have massive value or even a little bit of value, but they're just easier to adopt, easier to implement, faster. We want to make those type of recommendations to our customers and say, hey, we recommend starting with this versus asking the customer what do they want and just being, working towards scope versus working towards actual achievement and accomplishment of value. I will say one more thing about onboarding is that you want to make sure that the scope of work, if you have one for onboarding, is being reviewed by the people who are supposed to do the onboarding itself and not just the sales team, which is another pitfall that I'm seeing in the onboarding phase, where sales dictates the scope of work, and then now we're on the hook to just completely work ourselves out to make that happen as soon as possible, and drives the team crazy. Try to think about it in a multi-phased approach. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. I did have a couple quick questions that came in that I think are relevant to this. One, someone suggested, hey, I've heard that 90 days, this is from Amantha. Hey, I've heard 90 days is the golden time period for onboarding. Do you agree that is the goal to set, or is it different depending on the customer? I think we kind of touched on this, but maybe Brian, you could take this one.
Well, I think it's different depending on your organization, and not necessarily the customer, who obviously is the most important part of all this. But I think you yourself, you say, from a perfect scenario standpoint, and how long do I want my customer to be onboarded? You can set a goal certainly of 90 days. It can be 60 days. It can be 150 days, depending on what you're selling. The only point I would make there is that you can set the goal, but your customer defines whether that goal was met.
Perfect.
Thank you, Brian. I have a different perspective on that, Dan, actually. Sorry, Brian, I disagree with you.
Are we getting into a little healthy tension here?
Well, it's not a big deal, actually, but I kind of like to think about it as, we have two goals in onboarding: fast as possible, getting to value as fast as possible. We're not trying to implement everything possible. So we want to kind of negotiate with the client, because at the end of the day, the customer also wants to see value as soon as possible. So I think the question is not so much what does the client want, 90, 20, 150, but or what do we want? Like, ooh, let's go with 90. No, the question should be, let's challenge ourselves as to what is the quickest path to give the customer enough value so that we can accelerate the onboarding process. And then if we're not delivering all the value possible or all the value that the customer wanted, can we socialize a multi-phased approach so that we can get to value quickly and then provide additional value later? I think that's how I would like to think about that.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you, Iris. Okay, we've gone through the first stage of this journey and we've had a lot of great comments so far. So I want to keep going through this so that we can share a little bit of advice on all of these stages. So maybe Iris, if you don't mind taking the first stab at talking about how you think about the adoption stage in the journey and what is important from your perspective as people build that out.
Yeah, so first of all, just to clarify, the way that I think about adoption is that phase right after onboarding where the customer is very clear around the use case. We gave them some features and functions, and now our chief concern in order to get to the retention is just make sure that their end users are actually using it, that leadership gets the insights they need so that they can do data-driven strategy decisions. Yeah. And I got to say, this is the main risk usually in year one, usually, not always, but for like 90% of the time, this is the main risk in year one. We finished the implement, gave them the keys, are not using it. So adoption is really about making our product sticky, having them see the value and incorporate it as part of their processes.
Yeah, not an easy thing to do. As a software user myself, I know I am guilty of not using all the features of the things that I buy. There's got to be a solution for that. But anyway, Brian, love to hear your perspective.
I think the adoption stage is really where you want to have a lot of your data on usage set up for the customer. How often they're using it, how long they're using it, what different features in the app or in your solution are they using, and ensuring that what they're using again goes back to what they voiced to you or to the sales team in terms of the value that they want to get out of your product, right? So that's very subjective data that you can get from a multitude of different places. So starting the data gathering process here is crucially important. That data also includes if you have a model that's a little bit more high touch and you have the CSM connected to it, making sure that the CSM is regularly sort of defined by your organization, following up with the customer, and again asking, are you getting what you need to get? How can I help you? Can I show you something? Can I send you a help video? Can I do something for you, record it, and send it to you to add to your help library? These are all things that we recommend doing, and we practice here at UserIQ.
Awesome. We are going really deep into these topics, which is great. Trying to be conscious of time too, because we got 3 more stages in this journey and then a handful of other slides. I do have an interesting question. I'm just going to ask you, Reed, to answer it to keep us on time. This came from Justin. What question can help you lead the customer to quantify the value they're expecting? Because sometimes actually getting that information from the customer is not an easy thing to do. So if you can give us maybe 1 or 2 examples of questions you can ask the customer to understand the value they're expecting would be great.
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, you want to think through to yourself and have like different things that you think you provided value to the customer in terms of impact to their business. Did you increase revenues, increase productivity, lowered costs? We have like the different categories, the usual suspects, and then also work with sales on, how does that articulate in your world through your product? I think when you have this like list or buffet of use cases with a customer, and you can show it even on a slide, you can say, I think we delivered this value to you, and these are the type of things that we haven't really addressed yet. Then you can have a conversation, and that's typical in a high touch model. Otherwise, if you don't kind of like frame it for them, they might not think about it in those terms. Not every customer is super sophisticated to articulate the value to you, but if you suggest what the value is, they could say, that resonates with me, or it doesn't.
Yeah, and hopefully you get some indication of that during the sales process if you get good handover notes from sales about what they're looking to solve for. Okay, I want to move on to retention. I'm going to direct this one to Iris and let you talk about your goals, objectives, and how you think about the retention stage. If you can keep this maybe like 2 minutes or so to keep us on track, that would be awesome. But yeah, let's hear what you got.
Yeah, so the retention is typically that year or that moment where you actually need the customer to say, yes, we want to renew the contract for another month, another year, another 3 years. I think the main thing about that process is, did you do enough in the periods leading to that? So a lot of times when we see a lot of risk in renewal, we're actually impacting the adoption and onboarding phases rather than the renewal itself. So what can you do, 3, 4, 5 months before the renewal happens? So first of all, you may want to do a questionnaire to assess the customer's propensity to renew. You may want to offer some incentives for customers to renew early. If they refuse those incentives, whether it's a discount or additional features, functions, or additional free seats, however the case may be, you got to question, do you really have a risk in the renewal? Because if they have already made up their mind 3 months before that they are going to renew, they should opt to those early incentives to renew early versus later. Another thing that I noticed is that some very sophisticated companies actually have a very clear forecasting for renewal, and they would create the renewal opportunity in their CRM system as soon as the first renewal contract has been closed, and then they will add fields to say what is the propensity of the renewal. They'll update it throughout the year, not just very close to the renewal date. And they'll also say, if we have, let's say, $10,000 worth of ARR for this customer, are we expecting 9,000 to come in, meaning we are expecting a downsell, or are we expecting an upsell? And that could be updated throughout the year so that you can get a very accurate around the actual forecasted amount for renewals, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Awesome, thank you. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to ask Brian if you don't mind talking about expansion, right? So you've onboarded, they've adopted, they're using the tool, you just renewed them, things are looking great. Thinking about expansion, how do you look at that, at basically optimizing the results of that stage? What are some of the indicators that you look for that says, hey, there's an opportunity here to expand a customer? Let you take it away.
So, retention, expansion, advocacy, I look at those as a result of, right? So these 3 areas are really a result of the adoption and the onboarding that your customers go through and the experience that they had in it. For expansion, when you think about expansion, the number one key for me is how often are you asking questions of the customer, and how often are you really listening to what they need, right? Sometimes we get into a process, I do it more than I like to admit, where I ask a question and I'm already on to the next question, right? So in this case, slow yourself down, ask a question, listen to their answer, keep asking questions, because you will get eventually to that additional need that they have, in which case you can match that need with a potential solution that you have. And then I would say that the only other thing about expansion, we're talking about customer journeys, but expansion at times can be a little bit uncomfortable, right? Anytime you go to sell something. So the way I think about expansion from a journey standpoint is we want to make sure we have solid metrics in place in terms of their usage of the app, what they said from a voice of customer, what's going on with their organization, right? They can be using your app all they want, but if their organization's not doing great, it's probably inappropriate to go ask them for an expansion. So you do need to be aware of how they're doing it. But don't be afraid of the word no, because that's important in an expansion. Is you're going to hear no, but don't be afraid about hearing that word, and really focus on making expansion as a result of what you've done in adoption and onboarding.
Yeah, I really like that, and I like.
Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Yeah, go ahead, Aretha. Yeah, please.
Because Brian, one thing that I've noticed is, yes, if obviously you want to get to a trusted advisor relationship through a successful onboarding and adoption. However, I can tell you that that's not enough. we have to be, first of all, CSMs are usually super uncomfortable with upsell and even the word upsell. So instead, the mindset should be, can we offer more use cases? Can we understand what their problems are and offer more solutions? And yes, sometimes the solutions would require additional investment. But the whole language of expansion shouldn't be about the revenues we can get, but more about the use cases and the value that we can maximize for them. And then the dollars will follow. Tools that we use to create those conversations in a value-based appropriateness is maturity models, benchmark conversations, best practices workshops, methodology workshops, webinars with other customers sharing their processes and strategies. Those are the types of things that solidify you as a trusted advisor. Next, you want to create very clear paths to realize that value. So in the conversation, you might just exclusively talk about the use case and the methodology, and then you would follow up with, this is the success plan that includes all the pieces and all the different widgets you now need to invest in to realize those goals and objectives that we agreed upon in our other discussion. So I think that I just like to emphasize to Brian and the audience how important it is to invest in what we call value-based selling, and then have the CSM empowered with tools and templates so they can socialize what is that path to realize that value, whether it includes additional revenue or not.
Yeah, that's really good. That's super helpful. Thank you, Riri. I forgot what I was going to say. I was going to have a comment, but I think you probably covered it and then some, so I'm going to skip on to the next stage. Brian, if you can bring us home with advocacy, couple minutes on this at most, and then we'll move on to, we got another poll coming after this, and we'll talk about that too. So you got 60 seconds to tell us all about everything you know about how advocacy works.
Well, again, advocacy is a result of what you've been able to build through what Rita's talked about and through what I've talked about. It is honestly, in my experience, and Rita, I'll be interested to hear your comments on this. It's probably the hardest part of the journey because we have asked, so much from our customers already through retention, through their time, through expansion, and so asking them to provide a quote, a review, whatever the case may be, right? It's just another ask for their time. When we think about it, or when I think about it here, it really comes down to, again, using the metrics that we have that Rita has talked about. Rita, by the way, I really loved your comment on the value-based selling. Don't worry about the revenue. Make sure it works for the customer, and the revenue will follow. That's a terrific piece of advice. But when you're talking about it with the customer, make sure that again that you pick the right time and the place to talk about advocacy with the customer. That'd be my number one item, right? The right time and the right place. Don't use one or two folks too often, right? You want to make sure that you're developing a wide breadth of folks that you can go to, so you're not always having to go back to the same well. And again, same thing as expansion. It's okay to have the conversation here at the appropriate time.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned listening for those signals or markers where it's appropriate to ask the customer to talk about the next piece of your whatever it is that you provide, or have that conversation about would they do something that you ask them to do. Like the timing is right, being sensitive and empathetic to things going on in their world will make those conversations be a lot less awkward. Awesome. So thanks for that. That was a whole bunch of good content there. So appreciate all of you guys walking us through that. Want to move on to the next item, which is another poll. So hopefully everybody, if you don't mind taking 45 seconds or so to answer this question. We just talked about all those journeys. Which phase of the journey do you all think is most important? All right, the results are in. Overwhelmingly, it was the earlier parts of the customer journey. That didn't surprise me. 54% said onboarding is the most important, 30% said adoption, retention came in at 15%. So Brian, love some quick comments on this. Did this surprise you at all?
No surprises there. I said it earlier on, my personal opinion was that onboarding is the most important. Interesting that nobody had, I think the only surprise I had is nobody had advocacy. I would think maybe more mature models might say that advocacy is most important because at that point you've kind of got A through C and even maybe into D figured out. And now you want to spread the word across a diverse base of customers. But that would be in line, those results are in line with what I would have guessed it beforehand.
Reach, would love to hear your perspective on this. Did he surprise you at all, or is it right in line with what you expected?
Well, I think the advocacy got the lowest because that's value to us versus value to the customer. And most CSMs who obviously attend this session are very client-centric. And we know onboarding, it has the most risk out of everything. It's kind of like dating, the first date doesn't go well, doesn't matter if you're matched in heaven.
You don't get to advocacy.
It's kind of like don't want to mess with that one. And the rest obviously is a no-brainer. I would just say, look, expansion is actually really, really important. And here's why. So I would put onboarding and then expansion as number 2 for me, because here's the thing. Let's say you've done a successful job with onboarding, adoption should go fairly smoothly, and then also retention, because adoption has so much cloud. And even if you did adoption and retention well, you're still in a renewal risk if you don't work on expansions really, really well. Here's why. Usually when a customer comes to you, they have this one main use case, which you're going to work very, very hard in year 1 to accomplish. If you don't work consistently on expanding that use case for the customer, you become either obsolete or commoditized. So the next time a competitor comes in with the same use case, the same pitch, lower ARR, they might just switch because they only see you as like a one-trick pony. And so expansions are so important and key, not just for renewals, but of course, the profitability of your business.
Absolutely, and the more they're using, the more wired in they are. You guys are working together, the harder it is to unwind that. And so that also helps. Absolutely. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm going to go to the last topic because I want to make sure that that we get to cover it. It was one of the core themes of this discussion today, so give me a second to find it, which is, how do you make sure that as you're going through this whole process, you're not overcomplicating it, right? Because you're going to start thinking about that journey. You're going to think about all the things that could happen, all the ways you should possibly handle it. It can get, hey, what do we do for this product or for this segment of customers or for et cetera? Like, it could get very hairy and complicated, and maybe that could be detrimental. I don't know. I'm going to ask Eric maybe to comment on it first. How do you keep this under control?
Yeah, I help a lot of different companies actually create the customer journey map. That would be like our first step, or like a lot of requests are about, can you help us with that? And so the one thing that I have to kind of push back on is if they have like different personas or different customer types, that you kind of want to do everything at once. The problem with that, of course, and the risk with that is that it's completely overcomplicating everything. So the first step that I always recommend doing is like, do one generic one. So first of all, you'll have this common language across all personas, all different types of engagement models. So you might have your big customers and small customers, different persona. You could overcomplicate it and end up having like 9 different customer journey maps. You want to avoid that. So you start with the one, and then you really think hard about which ones do I absolutely need to have another shade of gray here, because it's a different team that handles the smaller accounts, or I would have to cut down significantly on the activities or change them significantly because it's a lower engagement model. That's it. If you do more than that, think about this. You will need to maintain all those customer journeys and then include them all in your tech stack for customer success. And then any change you will need to make in both your documentations and your software. So unless you have a little army of like 5 different CS ops managers, that's all they do all day long is just do these type of things, you want to be very careful about how many flavors are you going to create for your customer journey map.
It sounds like you just created a couple positions at their companies. Also, I can't only imagine like how many KPIs you could possibly keep track of if you were doing it that way. That sounds like it would be an absolute nightmare. Nothing that I would want to do. Brian, would love to hear your thoughts about this. How do you keep it simple, man?
Yeah, I mean, the overcomplication, has 2 definitions to me. One is sort of what Arit said, right? Is if you try to figure out every single scenario your customer goes through, it's not going to go well, right? Because customers have 10 different scenarios, and if you have 1,000 different customers, do the math on that, how many different scenarios you can have. So really try to look at the common scenarios, look at what most of your customers, sort of the 80-20 rule, go through. The second definition for me of overcomplicating it is when you put in solutions in a particular stage that are not best for the customer. They might be really good for you, but they're not good for the customer. The one quick example I'll share that I've seen are automated renewal emails. These emails that some folks get that say, hey, congratulations, you renewed with us for the next year at X amount of dollars. We have a lot of machines in today's world, but the buying process is still very much a person or people selling to a person or people. So in this particular case that we saw, they had sort of overcomplicated it by almost undercomplicating it because it didn't work for the customer, it worked for them. In a renewal sense, right, you need to be having that conversation with your customer, almost as Arit said at the beginning of our call here, almost go back to the beginning of the process, make sure that you're looking for those expansion opportunities, those onboarding opportunities. So make sure that whatever you design in your journey map, that it fits what the customer needs first, and then what you need second.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. This was perfect, and I appreciate your comments on overcomplicating it, because we talked about a lot of stuff that you could do, but we don't want people to get in over their head if they're not ready for it. We got a couple audience questions I think we have time for, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to those if that's okay. One of them, I think this was related to something Arit was talking about. You mentioned that the interaction with customers would help you define your customer journey map and process. Depending on the industry, how would you recommend asking them those questions? Is it you're polling them? Are you on Zoom calls? And how many do you want to get buy-in from before you feel like you've got a good indication of what that map should look like? Arit, I'm going to direct that one to you because I think it was your topic that's for the question.
Maybe clarify the question for me. Is that like buying from?
From customers. You made a comment that's around when you're building out your customer journey, you talk to customers, right? So should you poll all your customers? Should you have like a sample of conversations? Like how can you interact with your customers the best way to define your journey?
Awesome. Okay, great. So I'll walk through the process of change management that I recommend all my clients, because I think change management is really key. As soon as you create the customer journey map, you're in a change management mode, okay? And you have 3 risks. One, your CSMs would call BS. We don't want to do this. Let's not do this, and maybe it'll go away. Customers may not. It's like, what is this? This CSM never did this with me. I don't want to do this. Like they might push back. And then management would say, well, what is all this investment? All these additional activities would require additional CSMs. Show me the money. Show me the value that you brought in with all these changes. Changes are hard. And so you kind of want to think about pilot or a roadshow. So I'll talk about that. So as soon as you finish that, the first thing that you want to do is go talk to different team members, so different teams within your organization. Because you might have a phase called onboarding that some other team, maybe support, maybe sales, thought they own certain steps. Kind of want to share, here's my thoughts, here how I think we can collaborate on this step. and just make sure you have an internal alignment so you don't have anybody in the organization feel threatened. Then you want to say, okay, if I have a solid onboarding process already, and as I was going through the customer journey map, I weaved in a couple of additional activities. You want to test that out. Whether it's the sales handoff, you might have a pilot internally with the sales team, or if it's something that is with customers, kind of want to pick maybe 15 customers, like a cohort of customers that are, amendable for changes. They're, and kind of say, hey, Mr. Customer, we have this new activity. We'd like to, this is new for us. We'd love to have your feedback. Get those customer reactions, get maybe even as a quote. And then when you launch this new change for customers, that could be something you can celebrate, especially if it's like QBRs or methodology workshops that really do require a lot of effort from customers to change. You kind of want to rely on other customers that you piloted with to make sure you can create that enrollment conversation with customers. And then leverage that feedback to continuously tweak those activities. So great question, Dan.
Yeah, awesome. And we've still got, I know we're a little bit over, we still have a bunch of attendees still on the line, and we've got a handful of other questions that I think are really interesting. So I'm gonna keep asking them for a few more minutes, as long as our panelists don't just vanish on us. And we can post some of these on social media if anybody wants to come and look at them later. Here's a good one. I'm going to direct this one to Brian. From an internal perspective, who are the key stakeholders of the cross-functional team that need to be involved in defining this customer journey?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The key stakeholders, I think, number one, you need to have, again, probably more at SMBs and mid-size, you need to have the folks that are actually interacting with the customers involved in some way. Leave it up to you in terms of how often you have them involved, but it can't be just a leadership creation of a journey map. It has to be the folks that are interacting with the customers on a daily basis. You certainly want to have the sales team in there, because they are sort of the lead up. Irit mentioned 8 steps. We had 5, but I'm wondering, Irit, if one of those 8 steps actually involves sort of the sales team even before the onboarding process, because that is really sort of the start of your journey, right? With the customer. So you got to have the sales team or sales leader in there. I would also put in 2 more, the product folks. So that way they understand, or they can comment on what points in the journey they would want certain folks to hit certain pieces of your product. And then if you have a marketing organization, or even just a marketing person, get them in there, because they'll be instrumental, particularly as you start designing out your 5th stage, your 4th and 5th stage, about how we can get better advocacy.
Awesome. Enrique, would you add anything to that?
I think this list was very comprehensive. So I will only add that. Listen, designing the customer journey maps takes multiple sessions. And so what I would, especially in this world, everybody works remotely, or almost everyone, right? So don't invite everybody to every session. Invite the sales team when you're talking about sales handoffs, or the renewal process, or upsell processes, or even references, requesting for references activities. Like if you're going to add that to your customer journey map, then invite them to those activities where you think that they might need to be informed, collaborated with, or there might be some ambiguity around ownership. So that's the only distinction I'm going to make to Brian's list, because I thought it was very comprehensive. Once you have the entire customer journey done, I would set up those meetings with them to say, hey, we went through this effort. Here's what we came up with. This, and maybe even create a RACI chart for those who don't know a RACI chart. You can Google search it, but basically it just says, here's the list of all the activities, and here's who should be collaborated with, informed, accountable for, responsible in each activity, and kind of say, are we aligned? Is this acceptable to you, so that you can be successful?
Awesome. Thanks, Irit. I got maybe one more question that I'd love to hit you guys up with. Irit, I'm going to direct this one to you first. What are some of the predictors or indicators of retention and expansion that should be tracked across your book of business? And I'm sure if I ask you this question, you could probably list 150 of them. Let's not overwhelm everybody.
No, I mean, if you were gonna look, the way I like to think about KPIs is there's leading KPIs, lagging KPIs, and behavioral KPIs. So obviously, you know, if you were to pick one lagging KPI, just pick out the net retention revenues or net retention rate. It includes both upsell, cross-sell, downsell, as well as the renewal. One metric kind of encapsulate all of it. It wouldn't be enough though. I think that you really need to think about what are the activities that needs to happen in order to get to a higher NRR at the end of the year, and solicit those to your CSMs and say, hey, through the behavioral KPIs, and say, these are the behaviors or the activities I want you to focus on. These are the goals. I think you should do those 4 times a quarter or 4 times a year or whatever. And then leading indicators are, what are the initial signs that we're going to see an upsell? Maybe it's the NPS score. Obviously, satisfied customers or have more aptitude to do upsells. Maybe it's their response to the value questionnaire that Brian set them, or it's a certain activity like the request for reports is a clear sign that they might be ready for an upsell. So there could be different leading indicators for that. So that just depends on the business model, the application, and the availability of data.
Yeah, I think usage as well. I don't know if I'm not sure if I heard you mention that one, but just are they using the tool? Is their usage increasing? Are they using more and more features over time? Is one that I know a lot of customer success teams are taking a look at. Brian, anything you'd like to add to that? I think this will be our last question.
I was just going to add usage as well, so that was pretty comprehensive.
Perfect. All right, so we're a little bit over. Sorry for running over, everyone. If there's any unanswered questions, I'll bring those into our follow-up session, and we'll try to maybe post those into our CS community Success Masters, which is on LinkedIn, and we can facilitate some discussions around some of the questions that were answered and maybe some that were not answered as well. But anyway, we're at time, so I want to wrap. Thanks everybody. Thank you to Irit for taking the time to be with us. Thank you again, Brian, also for taking the time to be with us and for sharing your expertise. If anybody has comments on things that they would like us to talk about in a future session, feel free to email me or shoot me a note on LinkedIn. We do have another event queued up for July, and we're going to be sending out the link to everybody that registered for this event as well in case you want to attend. It's Taming Your To-Dos, Project Management Tips for Customer Success Team. So thanks everybody for participating today. Hope you found it useful, and have a great rest of your week.